According to Forbes, the average 9-to-5 employee works over 9 hours of unpaid overtime each week, and while CEO pay has increased by 1,500%, employees are making just 29% more than in 1978, with over half of all Americans now living paycheck to paycheck. Raising the question, why are we still using a system that fails to provide the most basic necessities? While the 9-to-5 has been one of the most dominant forms of employment in recent history, it is actually still a relatively new concept, and one that looks far different from what was originally intended. By the time the Industrial Revolution transitioned the economy towards wage-based occupations, the concept of work shifted from a means of self-sufficiency to a necessity for maintaining employment. With employers focused on maximizing productivity, break times were reduced, meal periods were eliminated, and workplace clocks were even manipulated to extend hours without additional pay, leading to an average 6-day work week, with many industries exceeding 100 hours a week. However, Henry Ford recognized that a workforce unable to afford the very products it built and the time to enjoy them was a threat to both business and economic growth, where in 1914, he introduced one of the most consequential labor policies in modern history, implementing a standardized 8-hour workday 6 days a week, while raising wages to $5 per day, or roughly $158 when adjusted for inflation, more than double the industry standard, where within a day of the announcement, 10,000 workers lined up outside Ford's factories, willing to endure the monotony of assembly line tasks for higher wages and better conditions. And to further accelerate this trend, in 1916, Ford publicly announced that he would stop issuing special dividends to shareholders, choosing instead to reinvest profits into building the largest automobile manufacturing plant in the world, stating, "My ambition is to employ still more men, to spread the benefits of this industrial system to the greatest possible number, to help them build up their lives and their homes. And to do this, we are putting the greatest share of our profits back into the business." And while it is still somewhat debatable what his true intentions were, his vision of corporate responsibility put him at odds with his own investors, whom he famously viewed as parasitic entities who contributed nothing to production, yet demanded ever higher returns at the expense of workers and consumers, where he was ultimately sued by John and Horace Dodge, minority shareholders of the Ford Motor Company, who argued that his refusal to issue higher dividends violated their rights as investors, leading to the 1919 Dodge v. Ford Motor Company case, where the Michigan Supreme Court ultimately sided with the Dodge brothers, with Ford's vision of using company profits to expand operations, raise wages, and lower consumer prices to be legally deemed secondary to investor interests. And while this law is actually only applicable in Michigan, the ruling set a legal and ideological framework that would later reshape corporate priorities. By the time the Ford Motor Company had officially implemented the 40-hour workweek in 1926, the Great Depression began driving the nation's unemployment to unprecedented heights, where in 1930, in hopes to maintain employment, Kellogg's officially reduced its standard workweek to 6 hours a day, or roughly 30 hours a week, with only a slight decline in workers' pay, allowing Kellogg to not only rehire the 300 employees who had been laid off, but it also led to increased productivity as employees worked harder and more efficiently, with the results including reductions in overhead costs, labor costs, and the number of work-related incidents, with Kellogg even stating in 1935 that the unit cost of production is so lowered we can afford to pay as much for 6 hours as we formerly paid for 8, which could not be further than how Kellogg's is run today.
I'm all for innovation and marketing, but the idea of having cereal for dinner, is there the potential for that to land the wrong way?
We don't think so. In fact, it's landing really well right now, Carl. Cereal for dinner is something that is probably more on trend now, and we would expect to continue as that consumer is under pressure.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But despite Kellogg's success in creating more jobs, boosting efficiency, and increasing employee morale, corporate leaders still resisted adopting shorter work weeks, arguing that a drastic reduction in hours would cripple productivity as well as profits. Where it wasn't until the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938 that a federally mandated work week was established at 44 hours a week with provisions for overtime pay. However, by 1940, a compromise was finally reached, introducing the standard 40-hour workweek, balancing productivity with worker welfare, and standardizing the labor practices across industries. But just as the 40-hour workweek became effective, World War II rapidly reshaped labor conditions. Alongside the demand for military production, the National War Labor Board lifted the labor restrictions, allowing factories to extend work hours to maximize output, while freezing wages through the Stabilization Act to curb inflation. Where as a result, the average work week increased from 38 hours in 1940 to over 45 hours by 1944. With many industries far exceeding even that standard. However, while many Americans viewed these long hours as their patriotic duty, believing their labor directly contributed to the war effort, employers also sought alternative ways to attract and retain workers, notably by offering fringe benefits such as health insurance and pension plans. However, following the war, the shift back to peacetime production did not bring an immediate return to pre-labor expectations. While the 40-hour workweek was officially reinstated, the widespread acceptance of longer hours during the war reshaped both corporate and worker attitudes. As record-breaking economic growth and rising consumer demand fueled industry expansion, many employers saw an opportunity to normalize extended work hours in the name of sustained productivity. Yet rather than continuing to work excessive hours, the working class initially prioritized the leisure and financial stability afforded by higher wages, ushering in a brief period where reduced work hours were once again widely debated, where, as an example, in 1946, 87% of women and 71% of men working at Kellogg's voted to return back to the 6-hour workday. However, over the next decade, sentiment gradually began to shift, particularly amongst men. By 1957, most departments at Kellogg's had transitioned back to 8-hour shifts. Interviews revealed that workers had become embarrassed by their shorter hours, especially compared to men in other local jobs, downplaying the freedom that leisure gave. Many also admitted they needed the extra money to buy a wide range of consumer goods and to keep up with their neighbors. But several men even described the friction that arose when they spent too much time at home. The wives didn't like the men underfoot all day. The wife always found something for me to do if I hung around, and we got into a lot of fights.
So, this is work?
You know, it's not as easy as it looks. Sometimes I gotta move the antenna, sometimes I lose the remote, and sometimes my butt itches real bad.
Meanwhile, tax code changes in 1954 made employer-sponsored health insurance tax-free for employees, while labor negotiations led major corporations like General Motors and Ford to expand pension plans, officially reinforcing the 40-hour workweek as the national standard. But the most important aspect to consider is that during this period of time, the dollar actually had purchasing power. Throughout the 1950s, a minimum wage worker could afford an entire month's rent with less than a week and a half of full-time work. By 1956, the federal minimum wage reached $1 per hour, or equivalent to $11.77 today, providing enough income to support a two-person household above the poverty line. By 1960, the median home price was approximately $11,900, or around $128,000 today, while the median household income stood at $5,600, or around $60,000 today, yielding a price-to-income ratio of just 2.1, enabling 60% of Americans to own homes by 1960, integrating both blue and white-collar workers into suburban developments. However, by 1970, economist Milton Friedman published a Friedman Doctrine, The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits, where he reinforced the idea that a company has no obligation to the public or society, only to its shareholders. Where Friedman famously wrote, "The businessmen believe they are defending free enterprise when they declaim that business is not concerned merely with profits, but also with promoting desirable social ends. That business has a social conscience and takes seriously its responsibilities for providing employment, eliminating discrimination, avoiding pollution, and whatever else may be the catchwords of the contemporary crop of reformers. In fact, they are, or would be if anyone took them seriously, preaching pure and unadulterated socialism. Businessmen who talk this way are unwitting puppets to the intellectual forces that have been undermining the basis of a free society these past decades." Where alongside worsening economic conditions, this doctrine accelerated the erosion of stability that the 9-to-5 job once provided, while effectively eliminating all concerns for the common good practically overnight. Where 50 years later, we are still having the same conversations, continuously placing blame on one another instead of prioritizing any forms of change. A global study by the Workforce Institute found that 38% of workers wouldn't wish their job on their worst enemy, a figure that jumps to 45% among US workers, where nearly half of all employees, including 29% of executives, would not recommend their profession to their children or any young person they care about. And when asked what they would want for their kids, HR leaders, C-suite executives, and employees alike didn't say high salaries or promotions. They said work that allows for family time, meaning, and fulfillment, as in addition to 9 hours of unpaid overtime each week, the average full-time worker also spends an hour commuting daily, which means that the typical 9-to-5 employee is effectively occupied for 54 hours a week while only being paid for 40. And unlike European nations that have enacted policies to limit employer control over workers' personal time, 55% of US employees still log into their emails after 11 p.m., 59% work on holidays, and 49% are unwilling to use their PTO, fearing that they might fall behind in work if they take time off. But despite these longer hours, the financial security of the 9-to-5 has just completely deteriorated. As wages have increased just 29.4% since 1979, or a mere 0.2% when adjusted for inflation, 62% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, with 59% unable to afford an unexpected $1,000 expense, and 40% drastically behind on retirement savings, alongside the most shocking facts that I have ever heard, in that 65% of Americans fear retirement more than divorce, 61% more than death, and 53% more than poor health. But despite what Adam Grant, a professor of organizational psychology at Wharton, attributes to status quo bias, where people assume the work structure they grew up with is simply inevitable, alternatives to the 9-to-5 model do exist. The world's largest ever 4-day workweek trial found that 92% of participating companies chose to continue the 4-day model after experiencing equal or improved productivity, a 71% decline in employee burnout, reduced anxiety, and fatigue, while increasing job retention. But while corporate leaders continue resisting structural change, with Google co-founder actually urging a 60-hour workweek as the sweet spot for productivity, millions of workers are already moving away from traditional employment on their own terms, where the gig economy is expanding 3 times faster than the overall US workforce, with over half of all workers expected to participate in it by 2027, with 51% stating they would never return to traditional jobs for any amount of money. And what we begin to recognize is that despite practically everyone hating their job, is fundamentally there is a tremendously robust ideological framework built into the 9-to-5 job. Any sort of discussion or critique on the 9-to-5, or work for that matter, is instantly met with the worst conversational enders in work harder, you're lazy, you're entitled, I guess you don't want to eat, go back and live in your mom's basement, back in my day, or, I'm able to do this, so why can't everybody else do this? It instantly ends any sort of forward progress. Because fundamentally, yes, hard work is incredibly important. It takes sacrifice and discipline and certain levels of intensity, and it takes a competitive drive and a lot of these different things to be able to achieve and succeed in life. But there also takes a lot of these other components that I believe that the shareholder primacy completely eliminated. That there is also compassion and empathy, and sometimes it's more important to listen than it is to speak. And we've completely lost that. The unfortunate matter is that just me being a young individual, having a discussion on jobs, people instantly do not listen to what it is that I'm saying, because in their eyes, any sort of critique against a job is I'm a woke Democrat, or that I get called it all of the time, that I am a communist, that I'm a socialist. But anytime that I also say, hey, I think that this actually is right, or we shouldn't put all the blame here, I get called a corporate shill, that I'm a racist Republican. Literally, I've had that back to back. You're a communist. The next comment was, you're a corporate shill. I can't make that up. And so what that does is it shows that each and every one of us are just spinning around in circles, not moving in a forward progress. When I was a teller during 2020, when things were just going crazy, an individual kept coming in, and I always thought he was kind of, I don't know, maybe goofy is the word, but he would go straight to the manager and he would always have papers that needed to be scanned. And why I say he was goofy is he would always wear a red hat that was like barely on his head. And I thought that was funny. But so he would come in all of the time. And eventually I realized that the papers that we were scanning was because his mom just passed away. And I always kind of enjoyed speaking with him, but it was never enough to where either one of us really knew each other. About a year and a half later, I was now promoted, and I was a licensed banker, but primarily I did business accounts. He walked in, and I think that I was either on the phone or I was doing something. And one of the tellers or the tellers didn't say good morning or good afternoon. And instantaneously, he got upset. And he said, nobody remembers me anymore. There's no more decency. There's no more community. This is supposed to be a bank. I'm your customer. I'm supposed to matter. Something like that. He was really frustrated. I got up instantly from whatever it was that I was doing. I went over and I said, hey, actually, I've worked here for, whatever it was, 3 years at that point. I actually do remember you. I was the one that scanned a lot of your papers. Come on in. I'll try to help you in any way that I can. So I kind of was able to diffuse his frustrations a little bit. And while I was sitting there and he was kind of just vomiting frustration at me, I realized that his mistake, or that the issues he was talking about was his mistake. And I knew that he could easily go on the app and take care of it. But I had the sense that that wasn't really the issue. He was frustrated at something else, and I wanted to help. So I sat there and I just kind of took it, and I kept taking it and I kept taking it. And I went on his, online system that we have as a banker. And I knew it was I could just do a click of the button and everything was taken care of. But I made it look like I was really looking for something. And eventually he started to talk more about his life. And I started to get an understanding of kind of what was going on. And there was a moment where I just said, hey, I just want to say that I'm really sorry for your loss. I was the one that, I took care of you and during that period of time, and I kind of enjoyed our conversations. I didn't say it like that, of course, but, and I haven't seen you in a while. So I wanted to say that. I just felt like I couldn't imagine having to go through that. And it completely removed his kind of barrier. And what he says is, things have been really hard lately. My son and I have never been further apart. I literally don't have a relationship. It has gotten to the point where it's so bad. I said, I don't even want you near me. I never want to see you again. So now I have, in the shareholder primacy, I should be like, sorry, got to make money. But I say, I know it's not my part, but it wasn't too long ago that I was a 16, 17-year-old boy too. And I said many things and did many things that I'm sure my parents were not happy about. And when I look back at it, I'm not happy about it either. But if I'm being honest, the fact that my parents stayed and they listened to what I had to say, not that they agreed, but they were there. When I needed them, I knew that I could go to them. And that when I reflect on my life, the reason that I was frustrated was because I didn't know what I was supposed to do with my life. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle these emotions because you're not supposed to show emotions. My friends were going to college and I was going to go the community college route and, all of these different things. And I said, just be there for him. Just listen. Like, you might not agree, but just sit there with him. And, he just said, hey, thank you. I appreciate that. I thought that was the end of that conversation, right? But it was an hour and a half that I was with him. About a week and a half later, I get a phone call at my desk, say, hello. And he says, hey, I just want to say, or no, he says, hey, do you have time? Can I come in? I say, absolutely. So he comes in and almost instantaneously starts crying. And he says, my son and I have never been closer. And he says, he's now living with me and we've had so many great conversations and he's starting to plan for what he's going to do for school. And, he just says, he's like, thank you for taking the time for seeing me as a human being. So he's like, please, I'll do anything. I want to buy you a meal or something. I said, no, I'm grateful to be able to help. I would have done anything to have been able to hear that when I was younger. And so I go in the back and I just start crying because it was like, I started working at the bank because I thought that banking was like, it's a wonderful life. That's how naive I was. I thought I was going to be able to make a difference. And instantaneously, I realized that wasn't the case, especially during 2020. And by the end of that month, I had my monthly review with the district manager and my manager. And in that month, I had brought more in investments than we had done in the past year and a half. So I was actually good at my job. And the comment that was said was, hey, good job on the investments. Why did you bring less credit cards than last month? And I said, well, honestly, and this is right when like the rates had gotten really bad. And I said, honestly, just the conversations I had, it didn't feel like it was the right thing to be putting a credit card, especially in this high rate environment. I just didn't think that it was what I needed to do. And my district manager says, well, we don't pay you to make that decision. In many ways, I can actually kind of see what he's saying. But, in that month, so this is the best part about the story. A month later, I got my my yearly raise, and it was 11 cents, so a dime and a penny. So that completes kind of the circle of what it is that I'm trying to say. That when I was a teller during 2020, my purchasing power was more than a licensed banker. And because they don't do internal raises the way that they do external hires, tellers were now making almost as much, if not more, than I was as a 5-year individual working there that was good at my job. And so I want to say that because we're missing so many components in human life now. And any sort of conversation about things that we can all agree on, we have to start listening. And again, I'm going to keep saying it, and I know it's annoying, but discussions have to happen because it'll blow your mind. But when you look at almost every reason why a labor strike failed throughout the Industrial Revolution, it was because the people on strike couldn't agree what they were striking for. Do you work a 8-hour day but get paid for 10 hours? Or do you work 8-hour days and get paid for 8? And they couldn't agree, so they just went strike. And they would revert back to the status quo. That's what we're doing right now. And I'm just going to keep coming out here and doing the best that I can. So I hope this was able to provide some value to you. Yeah. Until next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Coming to bed, honey?
Yes, dear.